The eagerly anticipated Dying Light 2 Stay Human is just mere hours away from release. With all this talk about branching narratives, verticality and factions, you may have forgotten that Dying Light 2 is all about slaying masses of infected and leaping from rooftop to your heart's content. If you want to tackle the hardest difficulties, however, or even need some tips on the game's other difficulties, fear not, we have you covered with some tips on the more nuanced RPG mechanics, crafting elements and so forth. Ladies and gents, here are 7 tips to make you a pro at Dying Light 2 and slay those infected hordes with ease. Buckle up folks, it's time to get those running shoes on. First things first, with Dying Light 2, developer Techland has sought to add some very welcome depth to its free-running zombie mashing title. That's right folks, the Polish studio has implemented some light RPG mechanics, and if you lean into them, they can be very helpful the further you get into the game, especially on the harder difficulties. The most helpful heads up to go into Dying Light 2 with is that you level up really slowly. After 35 hours, we are only at level 5, so that should give you some idea of how slow levelling up is. That means that items like weapons, more on that shortly, and gear are more efficient and with you for a much longer time. So, if at the nearest trader you see a nice bit of headgear that has great stats, don't feel guilty about buying it, especially with money not being in short supply and apparel being with you for more than a few hours. That said, in Dying Light 2, each item now has build stats attached to it, so depending on your playstyle, it's worth taking that into account. For instance, if you want to build a parkour specialist, look for gear that reflects that playstyle. And remember, just because gear has a higher level, it doesn't always mean that it's better. We rocked level 2 bits of gear when we were level 4 because the stats were that good. The rarity may sometimes be misleading as well. We often rocked a lower level rarity as the item was actually better than its rarer counterpart. That said, the rarer the item, the more stat boosts it will have, but pay attention to how they strengthen your specific style. For instance, improved damage on ranged weapons is no good if you're using a melee only build. One bit of advice though, do try and find pieces of gear with XP boosts for parkour and combat, because those two stats determine how quickly you level up, and Dying Light 2 is pretty much all about the parkour and combat. That means because of how levelling up works, running around and fighting will often prove useful, even if you may just be messing around and enjoying the sandbox. Everything you do matters. We do encourage, instead of running from A to B for a quest, you get a little stylish and take some crazy parkour routes along the way. It will pay off in the long term. Plus, we should stress this, although it's kind of obvious, due to the slow levelling up process, it's unwise to step into an area with a much higher level than your current standing, unless you're feeling particularly masochistic and or confident. Your call. Before we move on, perhaps the most important aspect of Dying Light 2 is looking out for the game's inhibitors, i.e. injectable needles which either improve your health or your stamina. It's your choice which of the two you invest your inhibitors into, although we highly recommend putting all your points into stamina for the first 10 to 20 hours, as there is nothing more frustrating than running out of stamina halfway up a tall building. So if you hear that GRE access key beeping, seek out those inhibitors ASAP. More stamina also means you can get to the higher points quicker too, and the rewards like the military airdrops, which are on top of tall structures, can be accessed sooner. Probably worth saying, but this is a Dying Light game, so if you're not accustomed to the franchise, weapon degradation is just as massive in Dying Light 2 as it was in the original. So much so that you should definitely not get attached to any weapons. And I mean any, even those super rare artifact ones. Weapons are plentiful, however, and even the super common grey weapons can be pretty decent, provided you're using the right weapon against the right enemies, i.e. a level 4 weapon versus a level 4 enemy. While there is no weapon reparation per se, mods actually play a massive role in keeping your favourite weapons going for longer, as with every mod you attach to a weapon, it will repair its durability by 50. So let's say you have an Artifact Long Axe that you really like. Artifact is basically Dying Light 2's word for legendary. If its durability is 210 and it has 3 mod slots, then when the durability drops to say 150, add a mod. Then when it drops again to 150, add another. and again, then add another. That means that thanks to your weapon mods, your trusty 3-slot weapon effectively has a durability of 360, which is pretty massive, and your weapon gets stronger with each new mod. We'll talk about mod blueprints shortly, but that's a surefire way to get the most out of your weapons. And in truth, most unique and rare weapons have 2 slots anyway, so that's at least an extra 100 durability for almost every weapon. With the rest of the weapons you pick up that aren't as good as what you're using, definitely sell them, along with your valuables, and you'll be cash rich in no time whatsoever. The only weapon that is not throwaway, however, is the weapon that you get at the end of the main story mission, Let's Waltz, pretty much Act 1, as a mission bonus, which is basically Dying Light 2's bow. While the bow on its own isn't all too powerful in the early game, if you focus on a few parkour perks further down the skill tree, namely Precise Aim, Power Shot, and Parkour Shot, and combine them with a Fire Arrow, Shock Arrows, and so on, it can actually become a fantastic addition to your armory. That said, once you get to the second area and your stamina is high enough, it's worth heading to the military drop THB V3P in the north of the Lower Dam Air region, as there's an epic bow right next to the military drop, which does 100 damage instead of the pipe bow's 30. It's actually a game changer that early on, and can make every boss encounter a piece of cake if you line up those headshots. It's an absolute animal. Also, keep an eye out when you visit traders from then on to see if a better version turns up. And remember, you can always equip weapons and items that are actually a higher level than your level. Perhaps the most important aspect of Dying Light 2 when it comes to making the game easier, and in our opinions, far more fun, are the previously alluded to blueprints, which tie into the game's crafting system. Right off the bat, you're going to want to slap all your resources into upgrading your medicine blueprint, which is incredibly weak and annoying early on, and takes an all too slow 4 seconds to use. By upgrading this, not only does it enhance its effectiveness in terms of how much it heals, but it also reduces the time to heal, which is absolutely key to mastering Dying Light 2. Then, what you choose to upgrade is entirely up to you, whether that's the Molotovs, which are remarkably powerful against the masses, or weapon mods, which make every encounter that much easier. Regardless of personal preference, you should definitely invest in at least one blueprint for a tip and shaft weapon mod at the very minimum, and then a grip finally for the 3-slot weapons, although these are fairly rare. When it comes to upgrading blueprints, it's not all that straightforward, as it's not just money and some honey you need to upgrade them. You actually need infected trophies, which come in various forms of rarity and are received by looting certain types of infected. Farming these can be very worthwhile. Infected trophies are not just dropped by the trickier enemies like howlers and bolters, but they're also more standard infected named virals, which move slightly faster than your traditional infected, who also drop them too. You'll know by the way they sprint at you and scream, so while you might be tempted to loot every fetid corpse, that's not absolutely necessary. Well, unless you want to, of course. Right, let's talk about farming strategies next. There are a couple we found particularly effective. Number 1, the daytime strategy. If you pick up, ignite and throw a red gas canister found around in the open world in the daytime, this will generally attract a few virals, which you can take out rather swiftly. So if you find a group of 3 canisters, it's worth stopping to attract a group of virals. One group at a time, may I add, otherwise you might get overwhelmed. And then there's strategy number 2, the nighttime strategy, whereby you initiate a chase and then stand on a rooftop and take out any infected that climb up. This method is much easier if you stand very near to a UV zone, so you can end the chase whenever you want. With this method, any infected that are able to climb up or climb out of vents will all have a trophy on them, so loot their body afterwards and you'll have a load of severed heads in your backpack in no time at all. You can also look out for the blue diamond encounter objectives that pop up randomly, especially at night, as sometimes it can lead to a special infected like a bolter you can kill, which always has a trophy on its body. The only issue you may have upgrading blueprints in the latter stages of the game is with the unique trophies, which are required to upgrade higher level blueprints. These can be looted from infected bosses during the main story, GRE anomaly areas at night, or anywhere a charger, goon, demolisher or volatile spawn. Okay, we've talked about upgrading blueprints, sure, but once you've bought and upgraded the blueprint, you still need to craft the damn things. Alas, this is where the obsessive looters will surely shine. From the minute you start the game, you're going to want to buy the rare, which are blue, and uncommon, green, resources every time you are in the vicinity of a trader. For starters, they're cheap as chips, but they will come in handy later on. In fact, if you're in the late game and are struggling for resources, you can fast travel between the bazaar and the central loop, and the vendor will have restocked and have new weapons and gear by the time you get back. Money is rarely an issue in Dying Light 2, especially if you adopt the following strategy: hoard and loot every weapon you come across, sell every weapon below your current level and the green and grey rarity weapons, then use that money to buy a moddable weapon. And, as mentioned previously, mod said weapon when its durability is down by 50, then do the same with the second mod, third mod and so on, ensuring your weapon will last for ages. In the meantime, you'll collect enough weapons to sell, which means you can buy a new one so you can repeat the process. In truth, you probably won't even need to buy a moddable weapon when you're more than a few hours in, as you'll have loads of them anyway. This is a surefire way to be rolling in coin with very little effort. Let's talk about specific loot tips. Even if you're buying the rare and uncommon items like we told you to, there's a chance you'll need even more, especially chamomile and honey, which are needed to craft medicine. These can be found on rooftops as indicated by pointy yellowy orange trees. There you'll often find UV shrooms, a birdhouse with feathers, which you'll need for crafting arrows when you get a bow, and also a weapon that you can use or sell. On top of that, there's a load more items there too. These locations are perhaps the most important of all. You can find other rare materials at Dark Hollows and Forsaken stores, more on those shortly. By far the most valuable pieces of loot, though, are alcohol for Molotovs, oxidizers for certain weapon mods, and feathers for arrows, so keep an eye out for those. A few final points here before we move on. 1. Don't forget to use your survivor sense whenever possible, which is done by clicking and holding in the right analog stick. That way you can see what's lootable in the environment. 2. Save your military medkits for the end of the game. Trust us. 3. Anything you loot, like an inhibitor container or a locked chest, will actually respawn loot in it, not inhibitors themselves though, if you revisit it at a later date, which can help improve your gear, weapons, or can give you plenty to sell later on. Your call. And 4. Don't spend too long looking for inhibitors early game, as later on you can activate antennas that place their locations on the map. If you do hear the audio cue and see the distance marker in the bottom left corner of the screen, however, it's worth taking the time to seek them out. Oh, and I repeat, don't forget to sell those valuables, holding Y or triangle while in the shop, because you'll amass quite a few of them while you're out in the open world, and they're only good for selling. That's it. Do remember though folks, that the higher the difficulty, the scarcer the resources, so if you're playing on the highest difficulty, you'll need to be extra diligent. In the original Dying Light, as soon as the sun went down, that was usually our cue to go and get some much needed shut-eye. Alas, not anymore folks. In Dying Light 2, nighttime is now your time to shine, because out in the much more dangerous pitch dark open world are a ton of goodies that will help you out not just in the short term, but also in the long term. The aforementioned Dark Hollows and Forsaken stores are basically internal locations teeming with infected during the day, but at night they're relatively empty and full of goodies, which seemingly respawn on revisits too. The two most worthwhile locations to visit though are the GRE quarantine areas and the GRE anomaly sites, which are usually home to inhibitors galore. And inhibitors are the key to unlocking more skills and increasing both your stamina and your health, which is definitely not going to hurt your chances of survival in the game's open world. The GRE anomaly zones can actually be tricky-ish boss fights early on, so make sure you're tooled to the nines before you wade into one of those. As soon as you get the epic bow we referred to earlier, or even a better one, and some fancy special arrow types, these can actually be a cakewalk. If you want to unlock fast travel, which you can upon reaching the second part of the city, you'll want to clear out some of the infested metro stations at night too. Others are inhabited by renegades and can be tackled at any time of the day. These come in handy when things start to open up a lot more, especially getting around with ease at night to maximise the nighttime hours. Lastly, on the subject of night, there is one mechanic you kind of have to master before you fully get to grips with surviving at night, and that's the immunity meter, which determines how long you're able to survive out in the dark. This timer can be extended naturally with inhibitors as you level up your stamina and health, and can be restored with the aforementioned UV shrooms and also immunity boosters, the latter of which you can also craft. Any UV lights will fully restore the meter if you stand in them long enough, so unlock as many of those outposts as you can, whether that's a windmill or a night runner hideout, so that you have plenty of options between looting runs for places to top up your immunity without using items. By the way, nighttime starts around 7:30 PM. You will hear a warning alarm. That's when the sun is going down, and darkness falls by 8 PM, then lasts until 8 AM when the sun rises once more. And guess what? Whatever you do at night gets a nighttime bonus as well. It's win-win. Right, not so much a do this or fail tip this one, for one main reason, and that's that you should probably play Dying Light 2 how you want during your first time through, because those choices you make have wide and lasting complications and consequences, and it feels odd choosing a faction just for its rewards. In truth, while the rewards are great, they're not going to screw you over if you don't have them. That said, in order to unlock the Bootlicker achievement or trophy, you're going to need to pick a side from the off and stick with them throughout everything, which, let's be honest, isn't how the fate of the city should be decided. It's a pretty shitty achievement or trophy if you ask us. If you're asking us which way to go from a purely reward standpoint, honestly, there's only one choice here. You've got to back those peacekeepers. Sure, while the Survivor parkour rewards are fantastic, the actual Peacekeeper rewards can be game-changing, especially when taking on the infected hordes. The crossbow pack at level 4 can be devastating, and the electrical traps, the car bombs, the Molotov lanterns and more can actually help you out when things get a bit sticky. The Survivor's rewards are going to help you get around quicker and more safely, sure, but you don't really need any of those once you have access to the game's paraglider. It's worth siding with the Peacekeepers just for the crossbow in truth. That thing is badass. And last but by no means least, sometimes, it's okay to run away from an encounter. Whether it's against the infected or the renegades, you can't kill everyone. Well, you can try, but occasionally it can be a fruitless exercise. If you've done as we've said and invested in your stamina first, then you'll have a ton of parkour skills you can use to get away. Investing in far jump and double jump are no-brainers if you want to get around the city quickly. Due to the verticality of Dying Light 2, it's also likely you'll get killed more often than not by fall damage, so invest in active landing and safe landing as soon as you can. And if you're making a huge jump to ground level, if you can land on a car or even a bus, trash bags or mattresses, those will break your fall. And remember, if you do get stuck in an impossible situation, look for things in the environment to help you out, whether that's oil spills, gas canisters, throwable spears left in impaled survivors on the floor, or our favourite, environmental spikes, which if you can kick a zombie onto, results in an insta-kill. Same goes for the renegades as well. And if all else fails, just grab a mate to join you in co-op and just do it together. So there you have it. 7 tips to make you a pro at Dying Light 2, stay human, and to tackle the harder difficulties and open world with relative ease. Thanks for watching, folks. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. And good luck out there with the infected masses. Oh, and in Dying Light 2 as well.